Hi, I'm Chris Biro. So, are you a lumper or are you a splitter? What I'm really asking when asked this question, of course, is do you understand the value of breaking the behavior down into tiny steps of improvement? This will speed the animal's learning up tremendously. It makes it a lot easier for the animal to get reinforced. In fact, if you break the behavior down small enough, the animal doesn't even have to understand the criteria because all behavior will vary naturally, right? If you ask for multiple repetitions of the same behavior, even if the animal's trying to do the same thing each time, it will change a little bit. It'll be slightly different each time. So if you break the behavior down small enough, you'll actually get changes in behavior that you can reinforce even if the animal doesn't understand what's going on. Of course, we ultimately want the animal to come to understand what's going on. But in the training process, what's most important is that the animal understands the final goal. In the meantime, we have to get to that goal. So we typically start out with whatever we can get, right? Wherever it's at in the training or in the, whatever form of the behavior we can get currently, whatever it is. Probably not what we want, but this is what we got. And then we will change that behavior through tiny steps of change, tiny steps of improvement, which is known as successive approximation in the scientific community. Anyway, successive approximation, making little gradual changes of improvement until we get to the final behavior. All right, so that helps us get lots of repetitions quickly because the animal is making improvements rapidly. That also means that in the end we will actually reach our final behavior much faster than if we try to make big steps of improvement, because those are less likely to happen. More difficult for the animal to get reinforced. So it's greatly in your behavior to break that behavior down into tiny steps. So what I'm telling you then is that you don't want to be a lumper. You actually want to be a splitter, right? Okay, so there are multiple ways to break a behavior down into tiny steps. The first thing is to identify all the components that we have to achieve, right? Now we've talked about the 6 main pieces of behavior, and that comes down to willingness and ability, right? And the willingness, there are 2 pieces, and the ability, there are 4 pieces. So depending upon the behavior you're trying to train, the willingness may be a big issue. More than likely, willingness is something that we get taken care of fairly quickly. But just in case, let's touch it again real fast. The animal has to have a compelling interest it's willing to work for and a belief that its actions can achieve that compelling interest, right? Okay, so then we have to have the 4 components of ability. That's physical definition, physical fitness, physical coordination, and criteria of the task itself. All right, so if we're going to break behaviors down, then we also have to break the criteria down into small steps. But it's important to recognize that each of those components may be trained at the same time, or you may not be able to train one of them because something has to happen and you may be only able to work on one piece of those components, or several pieces, but not all of them. So let's pick an example here. Let's pick a behavior and let's identify how to break it down into small pieces. All right, so let's pick the behavior of flying a parrot through a hoop and having it come land on my arm. Okay. In fact, let's just arbitrarily say we're going to ask it to fly through 5 different hoops, right? And they're zigzagging formations. So he's going to have to zigzag through 5 hoops. So how do we get there? Well, obviously, if we ask for him to fly through 5 hoops, zigzagging to get there to my arm, and that's our end behavior, if the only thing we're going to reinforce is successful completion of that, we're going to sit here for a very long time before that animal ever does it by accident, right? So it's probably not going to happen. So we're going to have to break it up into smaller pieces. All right, so the obvious first step is not asking it to fly through 5 zigzagging hoops, but to fly through 5 straight hoops, so we can just go straight through them instead of having to zigzag. Well, even that's pretty unlikely, right? So let's back it up and say not 5 hoops, but 1 hoop. We're going to break the behavior down to just flying through 1 hoop, flying over and landing on my arm. Well, I could sit here a long time waiting for any of my parrots to fly through that hoop by accident, right? So we're going to have to break it down even farther. We're going to back up and say, all right, we're going to have to get him to fly from a perch to my arm. And so on cue, right? Well, that leaves us backing it up even farther because the bird's maybe going to come when called if I've already trained it that, and several of my birds I have trained to do that already, so that might be an easy step for me to start with, but you may not have trained yours yet. So we're going to break it up, we're going to back it up into smaller steps yet. We're going to back up to, we're going to have to ask the bird to come when called, or we're going to ask it to fly. And you see the two are not the same, right? We don't have to actually use flight when we're teaching recall. When we want the animal to come to me, when called, I don't care if he walks initially. If he walks, climbs, rolls, does cartwheels, I don't really care. He can do backflips all the way to me. That's as long as he comes when called and gets to me, that is the first piece of recall. Then we can tell him how we want him to come, right? We want him to fly. And then we can say, oh, now on your way, you're going to fly through that hoop. All right, so that's how we wind up breaking the behavior into smaller pieces. And of course, backing flight up farther than that, if the animal's not willing to fly to you at all, let alone when you call him, then you have to, of course, establish some flight skills. He has to have the physical fitness. He has to have the physical coordination to, be able to fly from where he's at to you, come to a stop, land on your arm, or probably land on a perch before you get to landing on your arm, and coordinate that so he doesn't miss the perch, right? Or doesn't come to a stop high above the perch or too low below the perch, or come to a stop too late so he misses the perch and falls over it, or comes to a stop too soon and can't reach the perch. All of that's physical coordination. He has to do that before he can do this behavior. So all that has to be trained. And if he won't do that for you yet, or then you're going to have to let him just practice flying on his own until he masters those basic skills. You can't ask him to do something he doesn't know how to do yet. Same thing with recall. When you're calling him, when you're trying to get him to come to you, if he's not willing to come to you, you may have to start by saying, all right, I want you to look at me when I call your name. In other words, what your name means. Do you know what your name means? It means look at me. Right? When I say, Rover, come, first thing is, Rover, look. You may have 5 dogs out there, and when you yell Rover, Rover's the one you want to come to you. The other ones, they don't have to pay attention because you didn't call their name. So when you say their name, that means look at me, I want your attention. And then pay attention to the next thing I'm going to tell you, which is come. Right? So that's how we break behaviors down into tiny pieces. This will actually speed your training up dramatically because the smaller the increments, the easier it is for the animal to make the associations because he's getting reinforced more often, right? It's easier to get it right if you're asking for a tiny change. If you're asking for a big change, it's harder to get what you're asking for. Like I said, you don't even have to understand the behavior to get it right if the change is small enough. All right, so here we go. Let's look at how do you know if you're being a lumper or a splitter. How big is too big? How big is too small? Well, or how small is too small? There is no too small, really. It will progress quickly enough. Where you can run into a problem is staying on the same criteria level and not making a change, but keep continuing to ask for the same thing over and over and over again without improving it to the next step. Animal can get bored with that, or you can establish a part of the behavior as the end behavior when that's not really your end behavior, right? So you want to keep the behavior moving towards the final behavior. This is called shaping, where you're shaping, starting with what you can get, and you're making tiny improvements to shape the behavior into the final goal. Most commonly, that's the way we get behaviors that we're going to train. Anyway, the way you know whether it's too big a step, whether you're actually acting like a lumper, or whether or not you're being an effective splitter, is the rate of reinforcement. How often are you reinforcing the animal? How often is it getting goodies from you? if you're taking too long if you're standing here waiting on him to do something and he's not getting it right and he's getting it wrong too many times, so he's not getting reinforced, you're asking for too big a step. You have not broken it down into a step he can achieve. And sometimes that comes down to the same actual step, just changed in a way that you set him up by repositioning him or helping him make a mistake or helping him get it right. Those are sometimes ways that you're helping him you're setting him up to succeed, setting him up so that he understands the criteria. Right? For instance, if I want to teach the bird to do a dollar bill trick and drop the dollar into the vase, then if he's having trouble, I may turn him around so that when I hand him the dollar, he's facing inside the vase. So when he drops it, it automatically goes inside the vase. Instead of asking him to turn around to figure it out, I may ask him to do it facing the vase in the first place. Or, like with our hoop right here, we'll position the hoop so that the bird has no choice but to fly through the hoop. In fact, we may have positioned the hoop near the perch right from the very beginning before we ever ask him to do anything with the hoop. Why? Because that might help him become comfortable being around the hoop. He's not going to do the behavior if he's uncomfortable, right? If he's nervous or panicked by an object or the conditions in the training environment, then we're going to get unpredictable behavior out of him. So we want him to become comfortable with that hoop. That's part of breaking it down, making small steps so that the animal is more likely to get a reinforcement for doing the behavior. All right, so there we go. What we would do is ask him to fly through the hoop by positioning the hoop near a perch and then positioning ourselves so that he has to go through the hoop. It may be that too close to the hoop makes it hard for him. It may be that it's easier for him to get up a little speed before he goes through the hoop by positioning the hoop a little bit farther away. All of this is setting the animal up to succeed by looking for little things that help make it easier for him to get it right. See, our goal is to identify what we want him to do and stay focused on everything we can do to narrow it down so he's getting it right. The more often he gets it right, the better. There's a million gazillion ways to get it wrong, right? In fact, there's an infinite number of ways to get it wrong. And if we're punishing him for doing it wrong, all we're doing is identifying one incorrect way of doing it. Whereas if we're focused on narrowing things down towards what we want, there's only so many correct answers. How many books are in your local library? There's one correct answer, right? There's an infinite number of incorrect answers. So that's our goal here, is to help narrow it down so that the animal is being funneled towards getting it right. Anyway, that's how you become an effective splitter, breaking the behavior down into tiny pieces. All right, well, I'm Chris Biro, and I hope this is helpful to you.